Final session for this afternoon is looking at the Jamf Teacher app again, but also thinking about how it works in connection with Apple Classroom. So as we go through the session today, we're going to have a little bit of a hands-on session. We're going to do a bit of a live demo because as that teacher, I always want to see this actually working. So I'm going to do a bit of a live demo with you today around Jamf Teacher, but also having a look at Apple Classroom and comparing and contrasting how they can support each other. So again, I'm Matt. No need to do another set of introductions. And like I said, what we want to do today is make sure people are really au fait with the differences and similarities between the apps and how they work together. As Rochelle said in her session, we work really closely with Apple to make sure that our products are a companion to the products that they offer as well. We're also going to highlight some of that free professional online development that Rochelle has just mentioned then. And again, back to that resources thing, we're more than happy to share those resources to help everybody succeed with the tools that they have in front of them. So let's take a look at that Jamf Teacher then, reflect on what Rochelle just went through with us. And there's so much in there that can support. Now, like I said, as a teacher in my previous role, this is so powerful to me in that classroom. Beyond the IT things, I don't need to be the IT admin, but actually there are things that IT admins have access to that would have always been really useful to me in that classroom. Things like AppLock, such a powerful tool for me to be able to have that confidence when delivering my lessons. I can create and manage those classes because you never know when you might have that ad hoc session pop up, things that aren't necessarily regular things in your timetable. Create and manage those lessons as well. You know, some teachers might not be as organized as others, but we all want to make sure that we're prepared for those lessons. And there's nothing better than being able to prepare those lessons in advance when it comes to technology, to know that the iPads will be set up in the exact way I want them to be set up. We can also invite students to remote classes. Now, this is something which is probably less important as it was a couple of years ago, but it's still something that we can rely on going forward as we start to consider how our students are learning as a result of COVID. Are those students expecting to learn even if they're at home for whatever reason? And I've been told off for this before, but maybe the snow days are behind us and learning can continue as normal, although I don't want to be the one who has to tell children that. And we can also have that opportunity for that request for apps for students. We talked about this in the security section before. Students wanting to kind of play around with different applications and see what they can do and be creative with their learning. But we want to make sure that that's still managed and safe. So let's take a look then at what this looks like on the device. So these are my two devices. I've got them in the room with me. I'm going to jump into Jamf Teacher here on my teacher device, and you're going to see how this now impacts on the student device to my right. Let's start with the ability to restrict certain things. Now you'll see on here all of those different elements that Rochelle mentioned before. We can set the timer at the top and we can choose those genres or specific device functionality straight away. So let's just say that I want to turn off social media and shopping and music and all of these elements at the top. But I also want to turn off the camera. But I'm also going to turn off this one towards the bottom, spell check and autocorrect. Now, as a teacher, think about that from the point of view of supporting students in literacy. Often I'm asked around students using iPads and how does that impact on their literacy, because now spell check is there for them. Well, here, I've simply just switched that off. Now, if I tap apply on my device, that's going to send that message through to the student device, and hopefully you caught that. The second I tapped it to go through, the camera has now disappeared from the screen. Now, this feels like one of those magic tricks, right? Keep your eyes on the student device as I tap done, and then go to clear restrictions. If I tap clear, you'll see that instantly the camera tool pops back onto that device and the student then has access to it again. It is that quick and easy. So simple for teachers to be able to do this. You don't need to be the IT admin in order to make sure this happens. Let's then take a look at app lock. And again, let's put this into the context of a lesson. I'm doing a lesson around creativity, and I want my students to have choice in what they're doing in the lesson. But sometimes choice can be overburdening on students. Too much choice often leads to panic and not knowing where to start. Think the blank page if you're asked to ever draw a picture. So in this case, again, I can go through that list of applications and say, yes, I want them to have access to clips. I want them to still have the Jamf student application. They may want to do this in Keynote. They may want to do this in Numbers or Pages. So I can just simply tap all of the apps that I want them to have access to and then tap Apply. And again, you see instantly on the student device, all of the apps that I don't want them to have access to have now disappeared. Now the teacher has that full control to say, I want the students to use the following apps that they can see on their device, but I don't want them to have the distractions of anything else. Such a simple way to make sure that student creativity remains focused, but still allowing them to have that range of applications and ways of students doing things. And this links directly yesterday to the comments in the panel talking around students having that freedom of choice. But we know that too much choice can't necessarily always be a good thing. Again, I'm just going to go to clear restrictions, tap clear, and you'll see all of those apps will appear back onto the screen for the students to use in future classes. So you're not going to keep them restricted if they then move to another class where they need to have access to different applications. So let's take a look then at Apple Classroom and how does that act as a companion tool to this? Well, again, I've just jumped straight into that same class, but now I can see my student's screen. So it's going to offer me some additional functionality that I might not have had in the previous application. I can now see that student screen. I can open that student screen directly into an application and I can see the work that they're doing. So from this point of view, I've now got a tool which is going to support me in class with assessment for learning opportunities, help that student with any misconceptions that I might see that they might be scared to put their hand up to be corrected on.
I didn't catch that.
And lots of other ways that we can utilize this. I can tap on hide those so I can retain their attention and make sure that students' attention stays with the teacher for giving additional areas of input. So really, really simple companion applications that you can use, both Jamf Teacher and Apple Classroom. And then when we look at Apple Classroom then in a little bit more detail, we combine those two tools to make sure that you have that full support in your classroom, really supporting that learning experience and helping our learners remain fully on track. Apple Classroom utilizes our managed Apple IDs, so we can have all of that set up directly within our Jamf School or Jamf Pro instance. We know that Apple Classroom is also available on both Mac and iPad. So we have that opportunity for our students, for our teachers to be able to manage those students regardless of the device that they're utilizing. If you have got shared devices, as well as that opportunity that Rochelle mentioned before about the passcodes, which is fantastic, you can also use this to help students log out of that device. And we can use all of these actions to help us really cut down on wasted teacher time in the classroom, as well as student time. Just that simple act of opening up an app on a device can save minutes if students can't find where the apps might be on their device. And it just saves workload for teachers as well. So let's take a look at some of those features across the two platforms and again, how they complement each other's. We can do multiple app lock. Like we showed in the demo, a great way to help scaffold that creativity without being over restrictive. We don't also want them to be too open in their choices. We can also lock those students to multiple websites. Rochelle mentioned this before in her presentation as well. The freedom for students to be able to go and surf the internet, but know that they're not going to waste time on websites that aren't going to be productive for them. And we can set all of this up in advance. And as well as that, we can lock those students into both websites and applications at the same time in Jamf Teacher. And as we saw in the demonstration, we also have the opportunity to restrict which apps are seen on that student's device. Going further, we can remove entire categories, as I showed. If we don't want the students to have access to games or music during lesson time, we can simply take that away. But we might give them access to those things during their break time, lunch times, and after school. We saw that in Apple Classroom, we can view their screens, which is fantastic for supporting that assessment for learning opportunity. And then thinking about taking assessment to that next stage, both applications allow us to proctor those students taking tests, restricting web access, etc., to make sure that students can't find answers that they shouldn't be finding and using their own knowledge. And then again, that creation of lessons, something really, really valuable as you want to just simplify that process. In Jamf Teacher, we can create that lesson plan in advance with the specific apps we want access to, as well as the functions of the device already set. So at the start of the lesson, we can simply push the button. Yesterday, we heard from James talking about how he cut down lesson start time from 8 minutes down to just seconds. And this is a valuable thing in the classroom. And again, with Jamf Teacher, you make sure that that can all be pre-programmed in advance to make sure that you don't have to worry about students going off on things that you don't want them to be utilizing. We also have that opportunity to create these things on the go. This is really, really important for teachers. Now, sometimes, depending on how you've got this set up, Apple Classroom can't do this as an ad hoc lesson. But in Jamf Teacher, we can create these classes, which really do support that opportunity to do something. Think about those groups that you take out for additional literacy or numeracy, and you might want to kind of interact with them in a similar way. Well, you can do that through that creation of the ad hoc class. We can also, in Jamf Teacher, have that remote class. Now, like I said, I'm not going to be the person who's going to say we're removing snow days, but there may still be that opportunity for students to utilize video conferencing software, and we can set up those linking directly to things like Zoom and Teams and Google Meets to make sure that students have access in a safe and secure environment directly to their device. We can lock the devices on both. And that's a really, really useful tool, obviously, to make sure that students are using the devices only when they're meant to be using those devices. And in both cases, we can use AirPlay to make sure students can mirror what they're doing, something which is really valuable in the classroom to allow students to celebrate success, share their learning with other people, and learn from each other. Now, this top one here, one that comes up quite a lot, the muting of devices. I just need to highlight it doesn't mute the students themselves. That's a feature that I'm sure many people would love, but that's just not something that technology can enable. But being able to mute the device is powerful as we see students being more creative with their learning and making things such as videos on their device or doing keynote presentations and practicing those things, and the sound may be being a little bit out of control at times. Being able to mute those devices just helps the teacher just bring things back so that they can give that next piece of input that they might need to do. We can also, as I showed, hide the current app on the device. Again, just to make sure that we bring students' attention back to where we want it in the classroom. It's not over oppressive, and I can remember in the early days of teachers using iPads, there was always the instruction to face the iPads down on the table so that it wasn't a distraction, or close the covers, etc. Here we remove that need for the teacher to kind of give out that element by just tapping a button, and that rule is in place. The students know that the device now has either the lock screen, as we showed before, or simply just closing down the app to just focus attention. And then the final thing to highlight here is the ability in Jamf Teacher to send messages to students. Now, this is a really, really important thing. You may have messages turned off on your devices because that's the system for the whole school, that you don't want messages to go between students. But in Jamf Teacher, we can utilize the function to be able to send messages directly to students, not student to student, but from student to teacher. And if you think about those students in the class that might not be as extrovert and wanting to put their hand up to ask questions, this is a great function for students to be able to have that communication method with the teacher, to be able to just ask those questions that they might not want the rest of the class to hear. A really valuable tool for students. So if we just have a look at these apps alongside each other, we absolutely believe that these complement each other to support that classroom practice. The value added workflows equip the teacher with both the confidence to manage the devices, but also add some great pedagogical and time-saving tools to help with lesson flow. Now, as we heard from Michelle before, we at Jamf are absolutely committed to making sure that all the resources are there to support our communities. And we know that Jamf Educator is a great way for people, both in the classroom and as EdTech specialists, to engage in what this could look like as they start to explore whether it's going to be beneficial in their classrooms. As Rochelle mentioned, it doesn't need to have an iPad in order to do it. It's all built in for you to have a play around and see how this could impact you. And again, additional resources to help you at all times in getting started with both Apple Classroom and Jamf Teacher, from configuration guides to helping you distribute those out to your teachers so that they can get the best out of these tools to help them function the best they can in their classroom with the devices. Now, one last thing to just highlight here, managing student profile images with Jamf Teacher. If you've ever gone into Apple Classroom, you'll notice sometimes your students are there as just initials in a circle. And while this is helpful to kind of identify who the students are, if two students have the same initials, it's not always that easy. So what we can do actually in Jamf Teacher is we can add images for that student, and then that instantly transfers across to Apple Classroom and populates Apple Classroom as well with that same image. No need to go all the way back through IT in order to do this. The teacher can do this in the classroom for themselves. Just think of the fun that students could have coming up with their own emojis, sharing it to the teacher, and then seeing themselves when they're both in Jamf Teacher or in Apple Classroom. Again, teacher-controlled IT changes that make a huge difference in that classroom for your students. And I also wanted to highlight here that Jamf Teacher goes even further. And we at Jamf have hugely important integrations and workflows with our solution partners. Just highlighting two here in Showbe and Explain Everything. How these things all work together to make sure that that classroom experience with iPad really supports student progression. And if we think about just utilizing things like Jamf Teacher to make sure that students have access to Showbe on their device, or Apple Classroom to enable teachers to be able to see the creations that students have made in Explain Everything, we can see we're building that total classroom package, which will ultimately lead to empowering that student success, highlighted by our three fantastic guests in yesterday's panel show. So just some key takeaways on how these support each other. We know that Jamf Teacher is that companion to Apple Classroom. It's not an either or conversation. It's definitely think about how they work well together. You may see Jamf Teacher as an opportunity to get your classroom set up to make sure that the iPads have all the tools that they want. And then Apple Classroom could be the tool that you use throughout the class to make sure that interaction with students is great. This is all free as well as part of Jamf School or Jamf Pro. So it's there ready and waiting for you to use. If you're not ready to go yet and you want to play around with it, take a look at our Jamf Educator platform and see how it operates in your own hands on your own device. And then check out those further integrations with our solution partners, Showbe and Explain Everything, because they are great companion tools for this in your classroom as you're working on changing and transforming learning for your students. So if there are any questions, we've still got a few minutes. Please do use the questions section. Be happy to answer any of those during the event, or please do contact us as well, and we would be more than happy. And as I mentioned before, The Jamf Nation is a great place for you to continue that conversation. And if you jump over there, we have got a post around what we've talked about today. And if you've got any additional questions, please feel free to jump in there as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you for listening today. I'm not sure if we've got any questions. I'm just going to jump into our questions, see if anything's come up. Hopefully that means that we've covered everything that you wanted to hear as we've gone through the presentations today. Please join us for future sessions. We're going to be back in November with our Jamf Breakfast Club, where we'll be talking all things education and hearing from some great speakers. So please do look out for future information about all of that. And it just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining in over the last couple of days. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with our panel guests, to hear Rochelle talking through some great things that you can do with Jamf Teacher. And it's been a pleasure for me to talk to you about security in education, and then something really passionate to me, that classroom management and how we can make sure we fully empower our students in the classroom. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings.